Oh, goodness me. Goodness. This reminds me of something. This podium, Michael and I were presenting the Denver Library competition, and I was very short in trying to find the remote back of the projector in the back of the room, and Michael said, "Let me see that." He takes a look at it, and he goes, "Bob Stern stole the buttons." See, I've already gone off script. I haven't even started. But that was what life was like, the man we called Mikey. Hello, I'm Karen Nichols. I'm one of the principals of Michael Graves Architecture and Design, and I'm often called one of the originals. And that's probably because I worked with Michael for almost 40 years of our 50-year history. We celebrated our 50th anniversary this year. We called it Past as Prologue. And as Shakespearean as that sounds, and it is, we thought it was expressing the values and the optimism of our firm and the way that Michael saw the world. Now, I met Michael in 1976 when I was commuting between New Jersey and Cambridge to teach at MIT. And MIT and Cambridge at that time was pretty peace-loving and tie-dyed, and I thought I maybe needed a better education in design, and so I thought, well, I'll seek out somebody like Michael. So, in the first meeting, Michael said to me, I have a project starting up. It's the Fargo-Moorhead Cultural Bridge, but I'm not ready to staff up for it yet. Call me back in a few months. So I did. He said the same thing. This went on for about a year. And then I suddenly realized that Michael couldn't say no, and I couldn't take a hint. So I hired myself. At least that's how Michael remembers it. It turned out to be a good thing, because if I were going to help run a firm in the future, one of us had to be on time. Michael seemed to like me, but he didn't like my boots. They were brown. They were ugly. They had to go. But back in those days, you have to remember that Stephen Harris, every morning when he came into the office, gave us all a shoe crit. I never won. Never once. But Michael, who tinkered with absolutely everything, the design of absolutely everything, he hot-rodded his shoes, and he always won. At that time, there were about 5 of us in a large room, a large square room, exactly the proportion we could lay out the entire Crook's house on the floor. And we did everything together. We'd close the office for a day. We didn't have much work. And we could go to the Yale for Jim Sterling's jury, or we could go to Princeton for Michael's. I then inherited the upkeep of Michael's lectures, especially Architecture 402, that cult classic that people went to year after year. So every Tuesday for 12 weeks, for 15 years, we stood in front of the light table trying to figure out what he'd said the year before. And no wonder people had to go back to see them more than once. And we're still working on them after all this time, at least I am, and hoping that someday we can get them to a point where they can be published and enjoyed beyond those really fabulous years. But Michael's overriding ambition was to have a booming architecture and design practice. He wanted to overcome that catch-22 in architecture where you can't get one of those jobs till you've done one. So we entered competition after competition, and we won nearly all of them in the beginning, whether in our attic office over a Chinese grocery or in a colonial-era houses on Nassau Street. We drew, and we drew, and we drew. And then the whole office got to go to the opening, to Portland, to Louisville, to Johnstown, and even to Disney. And then we got to take all of our families. Our families often took the brunt of the focus on the firm. Someone recently reminded me that I negotiated a Disney contract when I was in labor. They both came out okay. And I diapered babies on my desk. For Michael, the architect and the designer, more is more. And his favorite project was always the next one. Save for 2, the warehouse and the Newark Museum. Everyone working in the office from the mid-'70s on got to know the warehouse. Whether you were sweating zero tolerance on those tiles, creating a finicky 4 finish in the kitchen, or faux painting PVC pipes to make them look like bird's eye maple columns, everyone was there. Donald often escorted his brand new hires through the warehouse the first day of work and said, "This is how it ought to be. You have to be able to do this. My personal memories of the warehouse all revolve around two things: camaraderie and food. Michael and I won the Whitney Commission in 1981 after the trustees invited themselves to lunch. I cooked, we sat around the kitchen table, doors flung open to the garden, and we talked and we talked and we talked. For me, however, the warehouse will forever resonate with the sounds of our midsummer family and friends picnic. For all the big things we accomplished together, somehow it was the little things that also mattered. Except for the egg toss and the ice cream truck, this was no ordinary backyard barbecue. I'm not very fond of the chaos of a potluck dinner, and Michael liked everything matchy-matchy. So the tablecloths were of our fabric design, all set out so beautifully, usually by Mary Kate in the garden, and a seasonal bounty that I mostly prepared myself. I think I cooked for over 30 office picnics, for 60, 100, 160, more, sometimes with others, sometimes solo. Michael loved those occasions. He loved having family and friends at the warehouse. The warehouse, in all of its manifestations to us, is the perfect example of the meaning of past as prologue. As you saw in the beautiful Dwell video, it is filled with remembrances of past life, artifacts and furniture collected over years, the most beautiful elevator in the world to transport Michael from floor to floor after paralysis, paintings of the later years. In the same way that he encouraged his students to be lifelong learners after school, his past life at the warehouse is just a prologue for his dream that it will one day have a foundation and be preserved as a study center for generations to come. The other project nearly everyone in the office has worked on is the Newark Museum. For me, it started as a minuscule project and blossomed into a career. Like the warehouse, we executed project after project at the museum, spanning all decades, from the 1960s to the present. It has been transformative in the city, an extraordinary relationship between architect and client, the epitome of past as prologue. It therefore gives me great pleasure to introduce our client, colleague, and friend, Mary Sue Sweeney Price, Director Emerita of the Newark Museum. Mary Sue worked with Michael as a client as long as I as a partner.
Thank you, Karen. Michael. The apocryphal story begins in 1967, a momentous year in Newark. Sam Miller, my predecessor, arrives as director of the Newark Museum, fresh from the Albright Knox Art Gallery in Buffalo, itself recently re-envisioned by Gordon Bunshaft. Newark's powerful board, led by Charles Engelhard, has already voted to raise the 1885 beer baronial mansion of Peter Ballantyne. Sam Miller harbors no particular affection for late Victorian architecture, but replacing such a rich structure with modern mid-century mediocrity ran against his grain. He places a call to Robert Geddes, whose response Sam loved to quote. "There is a young man on my faculty whose name will become a household word. Hire him." And so Sam did, and so clearly did Michael fulfill this prophecy. And thus a 50-year relationship began, a relationship marked by constant innovation and change, acceptance and resilience, uncanny optimism, commitment, and dedication, and as I now realize and acknowledge, true friendship. To me, these are the hallmarks of Michael's greatness, embodied in one defining relationship and project. 1967 was indeed a signal year for Newark, New Jersey, the year of devastating riots, the urban rebellion that defined our beleaguered city for virtually the entire second half of the 20th century. The response in our built world was equally cataclysmic, a series of bunker-like structures, both corporate and academic, that discouraged, indeed eliminated, a sense of place. Workers by the thousands daily funneled into underground lots, walked across sky bridges, lunched en suite, never having the opportunity to experience or understand the all too fragile urban fabric of one of the nation's most venerable and oldest cities. Much too facilely, Newark became the nation's easy metaphor for urban decay and dysfunction. Its very residents lost touch with existing objects of pride. Cass Gilbert's Jewel Box, Essex County Courthouse, or examples of the nation's greatest public sculptures, Gutzon Borglum's Seated Lincoln and Wars of America. This was a crisis of the deepest proportions, of class, of race, of agency itself, a city unmoored. Yet Michael never wavered. To compress the story, I must tell you that when Charles Engelhard died suddenly, the museum's plans were shelved, the first of several setbacks. The exquisite model of what would have been a late 60s, very modernist, but very impressive Newark Museum is all that remains, exhibited in the MoMA show, The Art of the Newark Museum. Parenthetically, the Ballantine House was saved and is now a National Historic Landmark. Incrementally, the channel changed. Donors reappeared, and the City of Newark capital projects, of which I can never be sufficiently appreciative, gave heft to our plans. First, appropriately given our history of educational access, the new Junior Museum Studios, where I first met you, Karen. Then, the Rampa Postmoderna. Who could have imagined Domus featuring a major article about a handicapped ramp? An elevator, quite beautiful, actually, or two, and then the breakthrough gift from Rutgers and the city of Newark of an adjoining building for the monumental sum of $1. Downtown real estate then presumed to be of little value. A former YWCA, and then Rutgers Administration and Law School, it became Michael's palimpsest. Thus began the series of projects that, when strung together as the master plan, became the largest cultural capital project ever imagined, not only for Newark, but for the entire state of New Jersey. Such a radical transformation that not even Sam Miller believed it. As the wrecking ball was poised, hanging above what would become the North Wing atrium, with great anxiety, Sam admonished Michael, but it's just an undistinguished office building. It will never, ever look good, and we're ruining it forever. But Michael, with great aplomb and patience and assurance and that authority that he had, looked at Sam and said, "But Sam, the Italian word for office is uffizi." Indeed, the AIA Honor Award citation describing Michael's ability to transform the Newark Museum as distinguished architecture on a shoestring budget. This latter, by the way, did not please the trustees, who raised over $30 million, a monumental sum at the time in our community. Nevertheless, we love that AIA award and are so proud of it. A long catalog of successes followed, the most recent the opening, at long last, of a vista onto the beautiful South Wing entrance, the Horizon Plaza, dedicated with Michael in attendance, of course, in late 2012. What I did not fully realize as I began this tribute is that ours is as much a story of urban transformation as the account of one architect-client relationship. As the master plan unfolded in the 1980s, Michael's interviews unvaryingly began with his desire to strengthen the architectural heritage of downtown Newark, and in so doing, quote, overcoming the dilemma of two separate classes of people who inhabit the city. I believe that people will take the museum and its collections and the city of Newark more seriously because of what we've done. Today, of course, we have a major performing arts center whose founders directly credit its very existence and architectural aspirations to Michael's Newark Museum. Downtown Newark real estate now exists in what feels to me like a parallel universe, and we are so pleased that Mr. Meyer has joined the effort designing a teacher's village. And we have a following generation of architects, some of whom I have had the great pleasure of working with, who practiced first in Michael's atelier and have now taken his lessons and made them their own. In his own life, Michael never stopped with just one transformation. We are ever mindful of his own journey. Brilliant projects dotting the Pacific Rim, ranges of actually attractive and really workable consumer goods, and finally, his confronting, not by design, the world of durable medical equipment. Michael was always a brave architect, never braver than in his work for the Newark Museum. He adapted modernism to what he saw, and that became iconic. He was unafraid of using humor and color and, yes, whimsy. He believed that everyone should have access to good design. He created buildings for people, and at the same time, he created a sense of awe and wonder. We thank you, Michael, our good friend and partner.